Hey, what's up everybody? This is Osterberg501 and today I want to do something a little bit different and go over an upcoming MMO that I think has the potential to be one of the next big MMOs. And the game we're going over in this video is called Throne and Liberty, which was previously known as Project TL, that has a pretty interesting history, and I also want to go over that in this video. But this is an upcoming MMORPG created by NC Soft that will be releasing in the second half of 2022. So this isn't a reveal that's just telling people it's being made. This actually has a release window of this year. And one of the more surprising parts about this reveal is that this is going to be a console and PC exclusive without any plans to be released on mobile, at least for now, which is not too common for NC Soft these days, which I think makes me and a lot of other people a lot more excited than having a game that would also be on mobile, which usually ends up meaning that it's a mobile game that is being ported to PC and console. But this is truly a next generation MMO on console and PC that looks pretty interesting when looking at the gameplay reveal. And this game was previously known as Project TL, and this was originally revealed 11 years ago. And when it was first revealed, it was said to be the next Lineage game, and it was going to be a top-down MMORPG, very similar to something like Lost Ark, and I think they were kind of shown off in a similar time frame. But past a few teasers, pretty much nothing else was shown of Project TL until now, and there's been some pretty massive changes because Throne and Liberty is actually a new IP and is not going to be in the Lineage universe. As you can see by the gameplay, it is not a top-down MMO anymore. It is going to be a third-person MMO and seems to be following more in the footsteps of Lineage 2. Because going off of the reveal trailer, this game looks to have a pretty big focus on massive scale PvP. A lot of the trailer was showing off massive amounts of players sieging castles with these big controllable golem summons, destroying the walls and gates of these castles, storming in and just having this massive open world PvP, which is quite similar to what they were doing back when Lineage 2 was released, but looking like a next generation version of that. And there was also a press release that went along with these reveal trailers. And keep in mind, these are translated from Korean, so some of the stuff may be a little bit wonky. But they go into some detail of field play, which is essentially just open world play. For example, we tried multiple things to avoid monotonous field play. Even in the same region, the geographical features change depending on the weather, while the flow of battle changes according to the wind direction. Over time, the players may encounter new mobs. The way and purpose of hunting keep changing accordingly. We worked hard to ensure that the three factors of field, environment, and player affect one another. We expect that such an interactive influence will lead to richer possibilities for players. So this is explaining different factors in the open world, changing how players will interact with the world. So changing of weather could affect the flow of battle, could introduce new creatures over time to change up how you would play in the same exact area from different factors. And they elaborated on this later on in the interview. Environmental factors such as time of the day and weather conditions, including rain and wind, keep changing. Although you might not be able to recognize this when you just start out in the game. It has more implications than you think. For example, the direction and strength of the wind affect the archery shooting range. If you practice lightning type magic when it rains, it affects a wider range of enemies, unlike the way it affects a single enemy in a sunny day. So essentially, if there's stronger winds, this can affect the range or accuracy of using archery. And if you're using lightning type magic and it's raining, it could turn your single target abilities into AoE abilities and make them more effective. And this is something we definitely see in more single or co-op RPG games, similar to something you would see in Divinity, where different environmental effects will change how you use your abilities or your weaponry. Terrain is influenced by environmental factors as well. For example, you can infiltrate the castle in diverse routes in Siege Warfare, including the underground sewer, and it could be filled with too much water and become unavailable if it rains heavily. So this can open up different routes you could potentially take. So say if there's an underground sewer that you could use to infiltrate a castle during a siege, that sewer could potentially be blocked off if there's heavy rain, so you couldn't take that route and that would be unavailable to you. Conversely, players can affect the environment. They can change the environment in their favor by causing a solar eclipse or rainstorm if required conditions are met. So then there's going to be some type of influence for players to be able to change the environment. I would assume this will most likely have some pretty hefty costs. And this is probably another way for big groups of players to fight against each other, say in big open world PvP battles or siege attacks or defenses. Maybe if you're defending your castle, you would want there to be a rainstorm so you could have lightning mages up on your walls that can throw down all of their lightning attacks that then become AoE attacks, possibly do more damage, which will allow them to more easily defend their castle. And in this interview, they go over some of their focuses for the game in terms of creating content. We have two major pieces of content. First is a well-structured, robust, and convincing worldview. Good understanding of game characters is a prerequisite for players to enjoy the game. Only then they can be fully immersed in the game with strong affection. To that end, the worldview of the game, which is home to the game characters, has to be solid and robust. So we paid a lot of attention to storytelling and utilized many tools and techniques that are common in console or adventure games. So they're saying here that one of the main pillars of the game is going to be the storytelling, and that they are using different tools that are used in adventure games or console games, and I'm assuming they're probably talking about more solo player focused story games to aid them in this storytelling. And from some of the other parts of this interview, it sounds like they pulled back and tried to look at the industry and the genre as a whole to see how to move forward, and that is how they got to Throne of Liberty and how they went about designing this game. And I would have to imagine that something like the success of Final Fantasy XIV has probably played a factor in them wanting to have one of the pillars of the game be the story, because that is definitely something that a lot of Korean MMOs have lacked in general. Not necessarily the lore or the world building, but the way they go about telling the actual stories in the game. Then the second focus is the challenge in games. So essentially how challenging the game is. So far, NCSoft's games focus on competition between players, which of course can motivate and entertain users in a specific region and class. However, a significantly larger group of players find it more interesting to overcome well-designed challenges instead of reaching the peak through competition. This is why we developed many challenges in Throne and Liberty. This is particularly true when players have to fight a boss monster. Players can overcome the challenge only when working together with other players and grasping the characteristics and skills of each boss and fully utilizing their abilities. So I think what they're explaining in this is that the second pillar is going to be very difficult PvE content, because that is actually something a lot of South Korean MMOs have also not had a lot of in the past. Even when you go to something like the Lineage games, they were mostly focused on large-scale PvP, siege battles, stuff like that, pure competition between players. And it seems like they are very much trying to give the PvE crowd and more hardcore PvE players a lot of content. Because in other parts of this interview, they're also talking about them wanting this game to be a globally loved game instead of just focusing on a specific section of players in Korea or different regions. They want a game that players all around the world will enjoy and have content that they enjoy, which is actually not something super common from Korean MMOs, like I mentioned. A lot of them are definitely more specialized on targeting specific audiences. And one of their other design choices that I'm a really big fan of is how they're going about traveling throughout their world. So the question is, we heard that players can transform into an animal in the game, and why is that? We concentrated on 2 points when designing different worlds for Throne and Liberty. To begin with, we tried to connect every world seamlessly, and we sought to allow players to maximize the spatial use by allowing them to feel every space three-dimensionally. To that end, it was required to reduce teleportation and enable users to move from one space to another at a rapid speed regardless of height. We thought animals are the answer, so we allowed players to transform into a land, water, or flying animal. For successful exploration of some region of the game, they have to utilize the animal's ability to move. In addition, players can carry other players once they transform into an animal. And I really like this design choice, because if I had to choose, say, something like Lost Ark, where you're pretty much just teleporting everywhere all the time, or something that's keeping you in the world but letting you travel through the world at a very quick rate, I would definitely choose the second option, and the option that Throne and Liberty seems to be going with. So instead of just having teleportation be the main way you travel everywhere, you're instead going to be turning into different animals. And they show this in the screenshots. They have a leopard or a big cat. They have what looks to be some sort of dolphin for the water, and then they have a bird for the sky. And I would fully expect there's probably going to be ways to get different skins and transform the look of your animals. But this is a design choice I'm personally a really big fan of, having a big open world and keeping you in that big open world, but just giving you the tools to travel through it at a much more accelerated rate. And that's the majority of the information we have gotten for Throne and Liberty. I'm personally really excited. A lot of the actual game that we have been shown looks pretty interesting and generally looks really good. And I like a lot of the design choices they're going with when talking about the game in this interview. Now it is NC Soft, so the monetization is going to be a whole other story, but the information we have about the actual game seems pretty good to me. But that is not where the story ends for Throne and Liberty and this IP as a whole. So with the reveal of Throne and Liberty, there was also a reveal of another game in the same universe, in the same time period, called Project E. Now this Project E game does not currently have a release date, but some of the information they give is incredibly interesting, and I'm not sure how they're going to go about this, because Throne and Liberty and this Project E game are going to be set in the same universe, in the same world, and at the exact same time period. So Throne and Liberty is going to be set in Silesium, which has Western influences and is set in a Western medieval time period, but Project E is set in Lasik, which has Eastern influences for the medieval time period. And remember, these are going to be in the exact same time period. Now, most of the other information we have for Project E is just about the lore and the story of it, but the general information points to Throne and Liberty coming out sometime in the second half of 2022 and being this big MMORPG with a lot of Western medieval influences. And then sometime after that, they will be releasing another game called Project E in the same universe in the exact same time period on the other side of the world map that will have Eastern medieval influences, that's going to have its own main story, its own countries, and its own lore going on in a completely different part of this world. And we're not sure if this is going to be like a story game that shows this section of this universe to expand the overall world building, or if this is going to be a second MMO that is a standalone, or if it's going to be a second MMO that's somehow tied to Throne and Liberty. We just don't know that yet, but it is a very interesting way to build out a new IP's world. Now, a lot of people have been theorizing that this is going to be another MMORPG, and that this might be two different factions that are going to have the possibility of fighting each other. So there's a possibility that we're all going to be playing Throne of Liberty, and then Project E comes out, and that will be a completely different faction, and these two sides of this world could end up playing out like different factions that could potentially end up meeting and fighting each other. Now that's just some theories, and I would expect if they did something like that, that there would be some type of tie-in for these games to where the progression would be different to catch one side up or something like that. Not sure how they go about this, but this is very interesting and something that I don't think we have really seen done before. And if Project E is a second MMO that connects to Throne and Liberty, whether it ends up coming out being really bad or really good, this will definitely be a pretty big evolution of the MMO genre and will definitely be something very unique. And that's pretty much all the information we have for Throne and Liberty and Project E. And these are definitely some games I'll be keeping my eye on because there's just a lot of very interesting stuff with the reveal of these two games. And I will definitely be doing more videos when we get more information about these. But that's pretty much all I want to go over. So subscribe if you want to see more Throne and Liberty or other MMO videos. Leave a like if you liked the video. Leave a comment down below what you guys think about this new MMORPG. And thanks for watching.